Welcome, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started for the afternoon workshop hour. My name is Susanna McGowan. I'm one of the co-organizers of the Opportunity Institute this year. I'm based at Georgetown University, where my colleague Heidi Elmendorf, Randy Bass, and Aranza Obscura are also based for the co-organizers of the Institute. So glad you could join us today. I'm here to moderate this workshop on reimagining student success with Dr. Jillian Kinzie. I'm going to do a brief bio. I'm not going to read anything. I'll just put the link in the chat. But Jillian Kinzie is a nationally renowned scholar in student success, student engagement, and high impact practices. She is based at Indiana University, where she's the associate director for the Center for Post-Secondary Research and the National Survey of Student Engagement. She has many more accolades and brilliant scholarship, but she's going to share some of that today with us. So I'm going to get out of the way and hand the mic over to Jillian.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with everybody today, and thank you, Opportunity Institute, for the opportunity. So great. I am excited to talk about this, and actually this talk is pretty new to me. So I'm excited to share some new content with you and get some of your reactions to it. I always do better when I get some audience interaction, which Zoom has never been my favorite site for audience interaction, but we're going to make it work today. But I really hope to take advantage of the chat. So for those of you who are already inclined to have the chat open and to use it, I would love if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and indicating your role. I'm really interested in who's interested in this topic by role. So if you could indicate your role, and if you can, I know this is a lot to ask, your institution affiliation, if it's not associated with your name, that would be great too. And I understand and I see some of you are in team rooms, so I realize that's harder. So our audience is a little smaller today than the large meeting session. So, I'm okay with you opening your mic and saying, oh, we're a bunch of faculty gathered around a table, or we're a nice mixed group, including student affairs educators or whomever is part of your audience today. Please do that. But if you're solo, take advantage of the chat to introduce yourself, and let's get acquainted with some roles, because I think that roles and responsibility matter to this topic of student success. And I will say that I do think student success is, I'll go out on a limb here and say that it is everyone's responsibility. So I think everybody is implicated in student success. And I also think that it means that it's hard to know who really is responsible for it and doing the work of student success. I think it's best if we can think about it as being all of our jobs and responsibility, but I know there are some that take it on even more as maybe even as a moral imperative, that I feel like it's an obligation as an educator that I need to be very concerned and addressing student success. So okay, I'm just going to let the chats kind of fly here. And then after we exhaust the chat, then I would love to hear if anybody's in a place where they aren't able to use the chat, and I'll give you a moment to figure out if somebody wants to speak. Great. Okay, so I hope everybody else is looking at this too, just to get a sense of roles. I'll do a little audible here. Just I'm seeing some very specialized roles in terms of the certain offices or units having responsibility for either diversity and equity and inclusion, or some special work in the Office of Undergraduate Education, research specifically. But I really appreciate the variety of folks who are represented in this space today. Excellent. Okay, sorry, I want to make sure I kind of know who's here, so I'm going to take a moment to scan this. Great. A large group at Penn State. Excellent. Yeah, with teams from various units. Excellent. Great. Okay, I like the variety here. Great. Excellent. Okay, so we've got a fair number too. Nice to see some IR folks. Fabulous. All right. All right. Well, I hope we can use chat. So please, have your fingers ready and, some way of participating in that. And I'm going to start by sharing my screen so you can see a little bit of the slides that I want to be able to share with you today. And I'll make these available and to the site that's already available or that allows for posting of materials so that you can study them much like you might be studying those slides from the opening provocation later. But again, I'm really excited to talk about this. And the official title is Reimagining Cultures of Student Success. And I am drawing a lot from the book that Susanna actually referenced somewhat in title, which is Radical Reimagining for Student Success in Higher Education. So this is a little bit rooted in the book, but also includes some other prior work on student success culture that I have authored or at least been a part of. And I want to start again, though. I'm going to make you go right back to chat here. And again, hope that we can do this. And this time I really am going to go to the rooms if there's somebody who can't use chat. But I'm very interested in what student success means to you. So I'd like to start with some really broad discussion about what it means in whether that's the context of your work or just when you think about student success as a parent, as a somebody who's interested in higher education, how you define it, and I'm not asking for a formal definition here, but at least some things that are on your minds when you think about it. Is it primarily retention? Is it graduation? Or is it more than that? And if you can add that to the chat, I'd like to get some of our thinking out there. And again, this time I am going to invite you really to open up your mics if there's somebody who would like to do that. Okay, good. I'm starting to see a little bit of student success coming in on the chat. Degree attainment, achievement of student goals, individualized goals. Oh, yes. Okay, that's the promise that students will be employed in their field upon graduation. So some post-college outcomes in our traditional kind of researchy kind of definition of that. So a little finesse on graduating. It's not just about that credential, but it's about doing it in a timely way. So we aren't burdening students with extra time and presumably cost and debt. Great. Oh, I like the one that's a little more outcome-based, completing with the knowledge, skills, and abilities to secure a living wage career. So both a focus on outcomes and a post-college success. Great. Okay, a little social mobility. That's a very important measure as we get into some new designations on Carnegie that some of you might have heard about that involve social mobility. Oh, nice. Okay, so there University of Dayton team, thank you for addressing the holistic well-being. I think that is an emerging concern, flourishing, another kind of broader conception. Great. Okay, excellent. All right. So now, like I said, I am going to allow, does anybody unable to use chat and would like to just verbalize their, and please go ahead and either raise your hand or just open your mic and do that. We're a small enough group. Give you a second here. And then I'll also, not to keep you in suspense here, but I'll offer a couple of definitions coming up. I'll give you the simplest one first. All right, it looks like we might have exhausted ourselves in chat, so don't need to have a conversation just yet. All right. Okay, but if you do want to, say anything, please do raise your hand and I can try and pay attention. Maybe Catherine can help in that too. All right, so here's our simple definition, and I think it follows most of what you indicated in the chat. So there's a variety of different ways to think about this work, and I do think it's important to define what we're talking about when we start on these discussions. Student success is a big term, and I think in its simplest form, it really is getting students into and through college to a degree or certificate. So some sort of promised outcome, the expected outcome. Now, I know some students might come into college or enter an institution just for the purposes of taking a course so that they can demonstrate a particular skill to an employer or just for their own personal knowledge. That's great, but I think really our ultimate objective, at least in its simplest form, is college to some sort of earned credential. There are, lots of ways that student success has been viewed and conceived, mostly through the lenses of retention, that famous kind of first year retention and or withdrawal rates, so measured by attrition, and then kind of thinking about how does that relate based on enrollment data. So that's historically. And then I think we've seen lots of nuances on this. So the more recent iterations and discussions around student success have involved a lot more about achieving equitable student success, focusing on populations of students who may not achieve at the same levels as the average at the institution, or out of concern of ensuring that all students are afforded and get to experience a high quality educational experience that prepares them for the 21st century workforce. So there have been some, I think, very important refinements to the simplest definition of student success over the years. And in part, some of this was due to a shift in, I think I'm pinpointing this into the 2010s, I think, when we saw a shift from this idea that student success was really students' failure to succeed. And it was very much focused on students' under preparation or their, perhaps sometimes we were more generous and less deficit based by saying, oh, it was a bad high school preparation. So we would blame it on some K-12 failure. And that, I think, really shifted to student success as an institutional responsibility. And the idea that if a student has moved into the post-secondary realm, that we need to treat them as our responsibility. And if we do not facilitate and help them thrive in college, that it is in fact an institutional failure. I don't know if everybody would go as far as say it's a failure, but I think that at least the idea of an institutional responsibility came in the 2010s. And I think a lot of that was ushered in and really encapsulated in the great work that Tia McNair and colleagues did in and really put a frame around, which is this idea of developing student-ready colleges versus an institution that was essentially blaming students for their lack of readiness. So the idea of transforming institutions for student success and to become student-ready colleges, I think, was the real signifier of this shift in a student success culture that was not blaming the student for their any lack of success in college. So I think what we're seeing now is this formal expression of student success units in higher education. And for me, I'm just gonna, since I knew Penn State would likely be in the room, I think this is a good example of it, this idea of a director of student success initiatives. And I don't know if Denise is in the room, but Denise, you're getting highlighted in this slide because it was right on your website. The inaugural Director of Student Success, overseeing the Student Success Center within undergraduate education. And as I started to really scan the environment beginning in 2019, I started to see all of these titles come up that included the word student success explicitly. And to me, this was a real shift in practice. And I think, this is an enormous demonstration, a very tangible demonstration of the increased roles that institutions have defined around student success. And we've now professionalized this role in a very specific way. So I think this is further evidence of this professionalization. And thank you for sharing more in the chat here. I think this idea that there is a formalization of this role, and with that becomes, I think, some real professional knowledge and expertise. And at the same time, I think it also is about assuring that we are spreading this work across all the units that have responsibility for it. So it's a very interesting place that I think we are right now. And this has only gotten stronger since we're emerging through the pandemic. And I'll share that kind of some ideas in a second here. So the more recent instance of student success conceptions, I think, has really come to put a finer point on what we are noticing about the disparities in educational outcomes that have persisted. And unfortunately, I think got even more exposure and have grown through the pandemic. And Stella Ben-Simone and Yolanda Watson-Spiva from Complete College America has really, I think, put an even finer point on this. And they too have identified and really placed the onus on the institution to address these equity gaps as institutional performance gaps. So we've seen this really important shift since the 2010s of institutional responsibility, professional roles, and now this idea that any sort of ongoing persistent gaps are really about an institutional performance problem. And that's what we need to fix. The other element I'll just layer onto this, I think that has become even more prominent during the pandemic when we really saw some slips in attention to mental health and the really need to bolster a holistic student experience. This was already emerging prior to, and I think it's only gotten stronger, is really trying to make sure that we're attending to students' sense of belonging as part of success, and that we are really attending to broader holistic issues of students' mental health, hunger, and homelessness, just to name a few of the realities of the student success domain today. So this idea of driving toward more holistic student support is also part of a new vision for student success. And again, I think I'll just draw another institutional example, this broader vision of a student success culture where we are unified in our approaches to unify the classroom and the culture beyond the classroom to address these holistic student supports. So to me, this is really an important point of all of the student success work that we've undertaken for the last really 10 years, not even quite a decade yet. But there's been some really important shifts in where we're headed with this work. And as I said, I think, now that we have what some are calling Gen P, the enduring effects of the pandemic, that we have even more work around student success to address. And this image really just haunts me, and it's particularly the headline that came from now more than a year ago to really describe the enduring effects of the pandemic, which really get at all this student success work that we've been trying to address. So I want to pause here and just check in with you to see how well this evolution of a conception of student success matches where you are right now. And if there anything that you want to lift up in some of these conceptions, how are they fitting your picture of student success? Is there anything that you want to add? And again, we'll try and do this via chat, but if there's somebody who has a kind of statement about how these conceptions either resonate or don't, I would love to hear it now. How is this? This is where if we were in an audience, in a room, I would be just really trying to gauge your knitted brows or your nods, which I will not see here today. So, all right, I'll continue to pause. I can wait. Anybody have a thought matching what you're saying? All right, I'm always going to proceed. Oh, go on. Yeah.
Yeah, this is Christian from the University of Washington.
Hi, Christian.
I do appreciate your kind of description and of the evolution and sort of changes that have happened over the last several years. I think sort of the impact of some of this for our campus, and as I think about colleagues I talk to, is sort of understanding that you're holding both the institutional imperatives, trying to be student-centered and focus on student goals and outcomes that they're describing and articulating, and coming into the university with goals around, and also trying to be realistic about resources, capacity, what's possible to impact, given that folks come with a lot of things that the institution may not be able to address.
Yeah.
And that has, for us and our teams, often led to people feeling burnt out or frustrated that they can't be better at supporting students in ways that we're just struggling to be able to do.
Yeah. Thank you, Christian, for volunteering that. I think there are several things I want to lift up in what you just said. One is that I think that the burnout that can happen with staff who feel like they can't meet these, they can't even possibly address the expanded definition that has come of late. And I think that that's a real acknowledgement and is something that I want to honor in staff who are really dedicated and see these needs and want to address them, but don't have all the resources at their disposal, or just it's just beyond what's possible at this point. So I want to honor that. And I also think what's important about what you said is acknowledging that we have people at our institutions who are still operating with the most simplistic definitions of student success and just kind of saying, why can't we just address this issue of graduation and retention? Let's just keep it simple and address that. While there are other folks on campus who really are completely committed to this holistic student success support. And those two groups are working in the same space. And we need to figure out how to both keep some people focused on those more simplistic, straightforward measures and have as many people as we can still focused on the other without burning each other out and frustrating ourselves. So I think this is a really important part of this work as we kind of go through this shift, is realize that there are people on campus who don't hold all of these impressions at the same time. We are not of one mind at this point. And I think it's really important to have that discussion with your campuses as you proceed in your work to say, where are we on this? Where as an institution are we? Where as maybe a student success unit are we? And then where maybe in particular smaller organizations or units, where are we on this? What do we think our responsibility is? So I invite you to have that conversation with people on your campus who are committed to student success, to have that definitional discussion, because otherwise I think it can lead to some real mistaken impressions and people wondering, why are we doing all this, or why aren't we doing more? Okay. All right. I'm going to try and move us into the space of some action now. So that's my first piece. The first segment of this session is really about coming to some conceptions and definitions on how important it is to have those conversations with the people that you're working with on student success work. Where are we and what do we define? So now I want to introduce where we headed and where we went with our Radical Reimagining publication, and kind of how we brought this group of people who had been working in student success really prior, right around 2018 or so. We really started to work in earnest on pulling together some new images of student success. And then definitely got slowed up and tripped up during the time that we were, dealing with the matters at hand during the pandemic, and then really pulled this back out because we felt like it had something to offer from a strong practitioner basis. And it starts with a really simple question with some, I think, what our team thinks is radical implications. And it's the question is, what would our institutions look like if students really mattered? And it's, I think, a deceptively simple question that is really complicated to answer. So this could be something that you would work into some of your workshops with folks on your campus as you continue to have your definition evolve around student success, and see if this evocative question surfaces some other issues. So I'm going to put it right out here as a start to the question, and then we're going to come back to it after I go through some content. So don't forget about it yet. So just here's a little provocation to get us started. So as I said, this group had been working. This group of colleagues that are mostly organized by the people who edited this volume, who you see their names on this screen. It was a project that was supported with the Gates Foundation initiative with ASCU, the State College and Universities organization. And just to give you a quick kind of overview, because I will kind of proceed through part 1, part 2, part 3, and then the conclusion through some of my comments and information that I'm going to share. So the first part is really about reimagining institutions, and we think that's an important place to start, to think about what it means to reimagine institutions, and then we move into reimagining the student experience, and then into kind of some broader higher education goals. And I'm going to short circuit that a little bit today because I want to focus a lot more on what institutions can do at both the institution level and the student level. And then I'm going to try and bring us right back to the conclusion where we talk a lot more about culture. But before I get started on that, I'm going to start with one of the a broader theme of the book, which is really that we have lots of tools, programs, strategies that campuses have been trying to deploy to create more holistic student support and to increase student success. There's no shortage of solutions and strategies and tools. And I suspect many of you already have these in place and probably work on them regularly. And in this next slide, I'm gonna, kind of just flash my top 10 list of things that are most commonly thought about now when we think about student success practices. Certainly one that's part of my heart and soul and ever being is student engagement as part of the National Survey of Student Engagement. This idea of early connections and engagement in practices that matter for learning is top of my list. But as Peter Felton and Leo Lambert and other colleagues that are in this space have demonstrated, it's also important that we think about quality of interactions, most notably the idea of relationship-rich undergraduate education. The other one that's gotten a lot of attention through longstanding work by both the National Resource Center and the First Year Experience, and even more, the Gardner Institute, longstanding commitment around building an intentional first-year experience. A lot more work around sense of belonging and the efforts of Terrell Strayhorn to really think about sense of belonging and how we do that on our campuses. Carol Dweck and the growth mindset work and the student experience project about norming support for learning. The people who are working in holistic advising, both at the NACADA national organization level and in the advising support network. The idea that we really need to make sure that students get feedback early and often through any sort of early alert measures is a big part of student success initiatives. All of the efforts to ensure high impact practices to support student success. Another, well-tried, well-resourced, well-proven solution. The idea of guided pathways and curricular maps and career maps. Even more important, helping students see the career options to build their commitment to student success. And then finally, this really broad, huge goal about holistic student support efforts and practices. So this is my top 10 list of student success practice, and they represent, I think, kind of the broad bucket solutions that are out there. Great. I bet you have a lot of these. I bet you can tick off this list and say, yeah, we do all those things. But here's my caution. We really need to be wary of solutionitis, this idea of jumping to a solution before understanding what the problem is. And this is fundamentally where this group that was trying to radically reimagine student success started, is that we really wanted to not develop, I think Adriana Kazar's word is programitis, that we don't want to develop programitis and or nor solutionitis that before we understand the problem. So that's where we entered into this work around radical reimagining. And our statement or our assertion is that really the student success movement today needs bolder, more radical action. But, you know, we scope this out perhaps a little differently than some other folks. And what we are really saying is that it's not about pursuing the latest solution or the latest program. And, you know, kind of implementing, you know, a whole kind of scattershot initiatives. It's really about being more intentional about reimagining the culture that we're creating for student success. Some people have described it as a constellation that we're trying to create around student success, and that everything is really connected in very intentional ways for student success. So, you know, the word radical, I think, is radical in the use of the word radical here. So I'm going to put a slightly finer point on it by saying that what we mean by this is that we are both trying to center the voices, needs, and experiences of all students we serve in reimagining. So it definitely calls up more and more inclusive student voices when we imagine reimagining and this idea of a radical student success agenda. But it's also really pulling from the etymology of the word radical, which is about root cause thinking and really digging deeper into that. So, you know, here's where I hope you're all kind of taking your own pause here to say, okay, are we guilty, or have we fallen into the trap of accepting a solution before really engaging and digging deep into the problem? So I'll just put that out there just for your own reflection. But it's something I think worth thinking about. And as you proceed with your work during the Institute here, is to really do some of that. Let's make sure we know what problem we're solving, and that there's a common understanding of it before we dig into the solution, or apply the solution, I should say. Let's make sure we fully understand the problem. Now, I will acknowledge that there are others who are doing excellent work in the student success arena. The one that comes to mind immediately is David Scobie, who's been working with the Bringing Theory to Practice project. And he also is using the word radical in the work that he's doing with their Paradigm project. And if you haven't seen David's work on the Paradigm project, I think it's a really interesting parallel project. He's got a slightly different impression about radical, and his use of the word radical is more about reorganizing the work and reorganizing labor. So I think there's a nice complementarity between what he's suggesting and what we're suggesting around radical, but they're different uses of the frame. So I think it's kind of exciting to think about root cause thinking and digging deeper into our issues. So I'm going to try and go through the first top level. So remember, I said I was going to kind of focus on the institution and the student experience. So I'm going to share a few ideas that came from the book and see how well they stick, and get your reaction to some of them. And I'll go through a couple of institutional ideas and then take a pause, and then do a couple of student ones and take a pause. So we'll see how this goes. I'll go through these fairly quickly though. And I'm going to start with the institution level. So one of the main findings from our work that was really a part of this radical transformation is about institutional leadership mindset, and really thinking more about embracing a change mindset, and risk as a legitimate strategy to really try and help people who are practitioners who are working in the student success arena to transform structures and remove barriers to student success. And the idea that I started this session with, of really trying to have this more common discussion about student success, and then really trying to make sure that you are using an overarching approach to a specific initiative. And the one that I illustrate with is student sense of belonging. And that is because we have a great chapter in the book that talks about how the institution committed to their definition of student success as being one of cultivating a strong sense of student belonging. So they fostered a unified understanding of that at an institution level, and really tried to remove all the barriers and structures that impeded that sense of belonging issue. So this required some risk taking and empowering certain individuals on campus to really take on that initiative as important. And the other is making sure, as you go through this deep kind of root cause analysis, really understanding what are the structures and practices that we have that could get in the way, that present a barrier for this initiative, or that could be leveraged to facilitate this success outcome around sense of belonging, as the example. So this institutional change is about embracing risk and facilitating action by and empowering others to act. So that's the first level at an institution. The other is really thinking a lot more about how we bring students in and really focus on what these institutional needs are, instead of just trying to accommodate um, uh, instead of, I actually said that wrong. So instead of letting institutional needs drive the organization, the structure was impeding it and was dictating, kind of because the solution demanded this. And instead, when we said, how do we do this? If we really let students' needs drive it, then we can reformulate and get to the root of the problem here, is what are the students' needs and how should they dictate what it is that we do, not just because the solution suggests this. So it really requires a lot of tailoring for the institution. And if you get into the book, you'll see one of the examples that we have really illustrates an institution that reframed their thinking around what they learned about students' needs related to their student success initiatives. The other way to think about this is to really let a student first orientation drive your policies. And I think this is a really interesting way that some of the institutions working in our student success reimagining project thought about their work, is they really went through and did an institution-wide audit. And the author of this chapter, who was a provost at the time, really talked about how she led her team through an institution-wide audit of policies that seemed to be blocking their success initiatives. And some of the things that she identified through their audit was there were a lot of mindset challenges that were problematic at the institution. There was an attachment to an issue of deficit-based thinking that was also getting in the way. And she describes some of the shifts that they had to undertake that got at these problematic ideas about students. So she felt that doing that audit and surfacing some of the mindset that were getting in the way were really important to changing some of their policy work. And I invite you to think about what your policies and practices say about the culture or the view of students that faculty and staff and how we relate to students have. So, again, I'm putting out some ideas here that I think might help you get through some of the challenges that you're trying to work on in your student success work. And I'll give you one example just to be a little tangible in this. And in the audit that was being described in this chapter, there were some ways that they really just advocated simplifying processes, things like major declaration and some other enrollment practices that they felt were really blockades to student success. And the one that was most, that seemed to sweep across many institutions that were part of this project, is this probation letter reframe that really changed the way probation was talked about in the letter that went to students, and described it as a process. It wasn't a label as you are on probation. It was described as this is a process of helping you move from a status in which you are not satisfying academic standards to one in which you are. And this idea that the student is not the only one and that there is a hope for a return for good standing were really some important shifts in how they communicated this practice to students that helped orient it around a student first practice. So these are, I think, pretty important examples of some institution level action that can be taken around policy. All right, the third dimension of an institution level approach is around how we think about data and analytic strategies, and specifically how we collect data and measure it and improve in a more student success oriented data informed culture. And the phrase that really is played out in this particular chapter is about how important it is for everybody on campus to know the student success numbers that are driving action. So at Middle Tennessee State University, this was really about knowing both institution level retention numbers, but also individual unit success numbers. So everybody had their own student success number and that they were held accountable for those measures. And this is actually a sign that was outside the institutional research office that said, know your numbers, no excuses, no exceptions, no escape. Boy, that sounds very ominous, but it was serious. They took it seriously, but allowed people to really create their own measures. So I think this is an important thing to think about. How are you defining it and numerically, and what is your data? How are you sharing data around this and communicating it to each other? All right, so that's a lot at the institution level. And I'm going to do one little break here since, I'm considering this a public service announcement. Don't forget about the data you might have that could help inform your student success initiatives. I can't pass up an opportunity to remind you that if you have National Survey of Student Engagement data, or the Faculty Survey of Student Engagement, or the Beginning College Survey of Student Engagement data, these are all good student success measures that you might access for your student success needs. Many of the institutions that were part of this project accessed their results, not a main driver, but I don't want to pass up an opportunity for you to draw on this as a resource. All right, that was the public service announcement. Okay, so that's institution level. All right, let's see if I'm going to take a little pause here just to see if there's anything in the chat that I want to address. Okay. Oh, and thank you for a reminder about David's project. Great. Okay. So I'm going to try and move to the student success, and then we'll see how we're doing here with some ideas. Okay. So at the student level, the student experience level, I want to talk about three themes that came through in our radical reimagining work. All right, the first one is transformative pedagogies. So the idea that very fundamental to student success is really about ensuring that students who are spending the majority of their time in their courses are learning by doing. And this idea that we need to really assure that we are transforming pedagogy at the same time we are building all of these other institutional supports for student success. So the focus on both course-based experiences and anything that is existing with that, the image that I have here is my reminder here to talk about things like high impact practices in this idea of learning by doing should be emphasized. And the more we can get students into course-based learning by doing and things that might be additional, either as an extra experience or as a co-curricular experience that is by doing, learning by doing, that we really need to emphasize those in a way that brings more students in. So to me, this is really an important dimension of this work, is thinking about transformative pedagogy and teaching and learning sphere at the student experience level. The second dimension that I want to discuss is about student support structures and how we really work through support teams and think deeply about the problem. And in this particular theme, it's really about knowing your students' problems and focusing on your students. And I hope what you pick up from this particular theme is the focus on your. That is so important. Too often we try and adapt solutions because they worked one place, and we try and transport them and don't spend enough time thinking about what our students' needs and concerns are, and what we know about our students, and what their cultures, traditions, and expectations are. So this idea of really developing and contextualizing student support structures was a dominant theme around the radical reimagining for student success, is pulling that in and demonstrating that student success element. All right. Next big theme is about assuring that we are supporting instructors and staff committed to student success. And in some ways, this goes back to the question or the statement about burnout that Chris made, and that how challenging this can be to do this student success work. And in an excellent chapter, the authors really talk a lot about how important it is to assure that you are both hiring with expectations that people support student success, and that we are rewarding and promoting with that priority in mind. And from a human resource perspective, that is the orientation here. So really creating personnel processes and policies that are about student success. And from the most basic kind of job description, where we indicate what our student success goals are, to assuring that when we review faculty files, that there's appropriate attention in promotion and tenure dossiers around what faculty do to support student success. How do we prioritize that in faculty work? So if we're going to have an emphasis on transformative, engaging, experience-driven pedagogy, how do we make sure that that's represented in a dossier and in promotion and in our hiring? So this is a critical element, and I would argue that as teams working on student success work, I want to say you have to focus on all 6 of these dimensions at the institutional and student experience level, but focusing on one and really digging in to a particular dimension might be really worth doing as part of this institute. But to me, these are really fundamental elements to the aspects of radical reimagining. So now I'm just going to go to kind of this last dimension. I mentioned I knew I would short shrift this, and I'm going to do it intentionally because I think it's sort of beyond the scope of what I expect teams to do. I want you with us on this, but there's a larger agenda, I think, for reimagining higher education when we think about the future of higher education and how to humanize work in higher ed, and how we value students' voice in the work of higher education. So I don't mean to let you off the hook on these dimensions that we need to tackle in higher education, but I think that it's a larger agenda than this, than I think we can manage in the Opportunity Institute realm. But I'll just, kind of let them fly across the screen here. There are some ways that higher education really needs to lead the student success work in a more humane and radical way that focuses a lot about not only speaking up for what higher education is and the way that we work together on these problems and these challenges, and the way we take greater responsibility for it. So I'm going to move to the last part here and get us to what I think is a pretty compound formula for managing this work. But before I get to this kind of, I won't call it a summary, but I'll at least call it a conclusion part, that I want to make sure that if there were some questions from the institution or student experience level, that we address any comments or questions you have for that work. So anything at the student or institution level that you want to comment on. All right, this is a pause for me to get a sip of water too.
There is a comment in the chat from Zachary.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, Zachary, I'm gonna just amplify your comment here. It is a really important part of tailoring. We need to do that, and we need to part of that very first recommendation about taking risks is also about being willing to try things and then take it back if it doesn't work. Um, you know, adopting something wholesale is okay, maybe as a first strike, but then realizing that we need to tailor it and adapt and give space for people to say, okay, this didn't really work very well. And it could be because it really wasn't tailored enough. So I think that's a very important thing to allow yourself as you're, and give yourself some freedom to do that. And to, your comment, I think I'm going to pair this together, is that you want people to take ownership for it. So I think that tailoring is also a way to build ownership in the solution. You're not just adapting something or kind of adopting it wholesale. You really are trying to develop it to meet your institutional goals and culture. All right, I'm going to try and bring us home here to get some few more ideas out here, because what ultimately we concluded as we kind of stepped through the major frames of this work is that this work really does require a larger focus on cultural transformation, that we are at a moment in student success work that is about reconceptualizing our definitions and assuring that we are working through our practices at the same time. So it's a pretty complex idea here. So, credit for you for getting in there and trying to think about how to do this more explicitly. But I want to offer you just a little bit of a broader frame for what this should entail. And this is outlined in the student success, again, the radical reimagining. I'm going to just give you a screen to kind of frame this a little bit. And I'm going to just step through these in a broad way. And I started with the idea of really designing with this more radical vision, if students really mattered. I think that is a mindset shift in itself, and I invite you to use that as a device to question and probe some of your work. So that's a pretty big, broad kind of cultural transformation level question. The second issue that I think we can't lose sight of is this issue that you heard in some of the opening definitions around attention to inequities. And that is an important aspect of this work, is making sure that you're lifting up inequities, whether that be in graduation and post-college outcomes, career opportunities, salary, wherever that seems to be a particular problem at your institution, that you're attending to those inequities. So those are pretty big cultural transformation aspects. And then I think we get more into some of the real practical on the ground work, which is about really applying that root cause analysis to understand your problem. So as a general practice and principle, try and apply that and just, again, step back and say, do we really understand our problem before we apply the student success solution? The idea that is also part of the cultural transformation is about mindsets and how we I'm trying to be diplomatic and gentle here by saying we need to really release ourselves from old mindsets that aren't serving students today and aren't serving our work, and really be bold about policies and structures that aren't serving our students equitably. And that's that's hard to do and hard to confront at an institution level. But I think having these conversations that reflects some of the evolutionary thinking might be helpful if you see that you're getting hung up in old mindsets. The other is this, what I think is a bold commitment to affect a lot of people, is to commit to enhancing pedagogy. There is a lot of gain. There's a lot of gain that can be made around student success if we commit to enhancing pedagogy. And I think it's beautifully illustrated by Mark Canada's work at IU Kokomo, who's been a long champion for really transformative pedagogy. The other kind of more specific pieces is that I think I just talked about when we were discussing student success practices, is this idea of we need a variety, a constellation of proven support programs, but we need to make sure that we're doing them with our students in mind, and that idea that we're applying our student needs, your student needs, your data to understand how these proven support programs will work given your students' needs. And then this idea of guiding all of our work with data-informed decision-making complements that emphasis on your students and understanding your needs. And then finally, it's how we do the work and with whom. So this idea of collaborative teams that support student success, and making sure that we are hiring people with that commitment, and that we are making decisions about retaining people with that student success commitment in mind. So this is the more complex conclusion that we arrived at by bringing together both the student and institutional views around student success, and that with that larger focus about transforming higher education. So a couple of ways in to think about this that I've already suggested, but I just want to put a slightly finer point on, is really insisting that we lead with a student first culture, that we are really thinking about that question that I started with, leading as if students really mattered, and that we attend to particular populations of students who have been historically marginalized, and to center their learning, what they need to learn and thrive, that's part of the cultural transformation. And, to kind of, again, get to that mindset shift, are we willing to admit that we may not have the proper programs and services in place for all of our students to thrive? And that we've got to think about, acknowledging these shortcomings and to take that responsibility on. And I realize that equity and inclusion is difficult in some states, depending on where you are. But I think if we really frame this around assuring that all the students that we are admitting to our institution are successful, that we can focus our efforts. So this is the part of radical action that I want to inspire, is really focusing on those student success dimensions that put all of our students first. The other thing we discovered with institutions that were able to make more progress around their student success initiatives is that they were able to take advantage of certain motivators and certain issues, structures on their campus to motivate their work. And the first one I just want to remind you about are built-in accountability mechanisms, things like accreditation, things like quality enhancement plans, that are part of some accreditation units, regular program review, general education program revisions and assessment, are built-in accountability mechanisms, annual reports that people have to produce. We found that when people built in student success measures or accountability initiatives around student success to those already existing initiatives, that they were able to really leverage their work. So I suggest that to you. What can you build into existing accountability mechanisms? The other is around encouraging greater data transparency. That Middle Tennessee State University example, that where data became much more transparent, really changed their culture. And anytime you can build in transparency and some greater data fluency around student success, that works to your advantage. The other is forming more coalitions around this work. So I hope you continue your group that's formed for the Opportunity Institute into other settings, and working across groups on this is a really critical element. The idea of borrowing evidence-based practices, know what the literature suggests, but tailor. That was a real motivator for people. So drawing from the literature, but then tailoring. And then finally, the most motivating for many of these institutions to make real progress was when they made it about humans and they made it a moral imperative, and really kind of speaking to the heart and people really feeling like this, we can't leave any student behind, that is our moral imperative here. So I think these are particularly motivating reasons, and I'd invite you to think about how present are these motivators in your work moving forward, and how might you help leverage them and connect. For example, the coalition one, could you connect your work to larger coalitions like the Bringing Theory to Practice Coalition to move this work forward with a little greater gusto? So a couple of things to think about for motivation. And now I just want to kind of close this out by returning to this, what I think is a deceptively simple but really radical question. What would your institution look like if students really mattered? And invite you to use this as a real prompt at your institution. So I'd love to, kind of take some questions or hear what you're thinking about in your radical reimagining. And I'll just leave you with a, kind of final, kind of reminder about the urge to jump to solutions and to try and resist that and let some time, take some time, try and tailor, try and really bring in some relevant motivators to your work to radically reimagine that culture. So I'm going to maybe stop sharing here and bring us back into the space. So maybe we can actually have a little conversation around some of these ideas, or maybe some chat if people are interested in exploring a couple of the ideas in more depth. So let's see. All right, I'm looking at chat now since I was ignoring it while I was talking.
Mm-hmm. So we can take questions in the chat, or feel free to raise your hand and ask Jillian directly. Thank you so much, Jillian. It's just so useful, all of these different dimensions to think about a really intentional student success culture.
Oh, thanks. And I hope, my way of thinking about this work is a little bit of a dislodging of some, what I think might be some stale mindsets around student success. And if there are some ways that you can help dislodge some difficult or unhelpful thinking about student success, that this might be a way into that. And then also to help you think about some new dimensions, or perhaps some areas that maybe you hadn't thought about that could be getting in the way of a really good idea that you have, that you want to move forward on. So if you notice you're having challenges moving forward with something, that you might kind of just pause and say, okay, I wonder if any of these other things are getting in the way. Okay, so I see somebody raise their hand. That's excellent.
Christian.
Yeah, again, appreciate the presentation and helped me think about some specific things on our campus we're dealing with. One question I have for you, so I can think of at least two examples where we went through a process to try to reimagine solutions to specific problems that were pervasive, challenging. We did things in emergency aid. We talked about withdrawal processes and policy. And I'm just curious, in both of those instances, we've seen, as we've kind of given those back to the systems that are in charge of managing them, that there's been slide back to institution priority or focus. And I guess I'm just curious if you've seen that before, and if you have any comments that would kind of help hold folks accountable to a student-focused process and outcome?
Yeah, excellent question, and a really good example, I think, of where we might think that a change we made may not have the impact we were hoping for because there are still some blocks in that, either a workflow or in not having the people, resources, or positioned to do it. And I think Christian, your phrase of kind of backsliding is, there's something still that either people don't want to do it that way or they don't feel comfortable doing it that way. So training some people in the new processes and perhaps revisiting the why might help. So what is it that we are trying to affect in this? And then showing some data that demonstrates what you're tracking to better understand if there's been an improvement might help people get through that. Either I don't want to openly or say kind of it's a reluctance or that they are being resistant, because I don't know that to be true. But I think what we at least know is that it's not quite being fully implemented in the way that we hoped, or it's not being fully realized. The outcome is not being fully realized. So I would try with both the, let me return to the why here, what we're trying to affect, and bring the people in the room who are doing the work and revisit the why, and then maybe offer some data about what you've been tracking to try and understand the issue that you're trying to influence. So if it's withdrawal or timing of withdrawal or the deadline, submission of prompt forms so that students aren't getting hung up on deadlines, let's bring some evidence to bear about how the practice or what we're trying to affect hasn't changed. So I think thinking about those motivators, and then I would go back to having the unit that's responsible own those numbers. And the Middle Tennessee State University example of having them own those numbers so they can track their own progress might be really helpful. If you can help them devise their own student success number, might be really useful. Couple quick solutions, or no, not solutions. I'm trying not to give solutions. Couple of ideas. Let's see, anything else that you're saying? Okay, thank you, Christian. Excellent. It's a good example, I think, but it does make me want to kind of return. The other thing that I think is borne out in our work in radical reimagining is how much we have to attend to these changes that we're making to make sure they stick. So, in the sense of belonging example that I started this, where at an institution level, they made a commitment to sense of belonging. And they had to spend time, retraining staff and making sure that as an institution-wide commitment to sense of belonging, that this continued to get the emphasis that it deserved at an institution level. So I think thinking about what are the ongoing professional development needs around your initiative are important to sustaining it. Despite our best efforts to put a really strong, in this case, sense of belonging initiative in place, retraining new faculty on what it means to put in place those sense of belonging initiatives in their first year courses needs to be repeated, and it needs to be reiterated quite a bit. So that was one lesson that came through from that example of the sense of belonging initiative. Yeah, yep. Thank you, Christian. The idea of the why is really important. But I think that goes back to some of the root cause and kind of analysis of the problem, that we've got to make sure we're really clear on what it is that we're trying to solve here. Yep. Excellent. All right. Well, I could ask you a question too, to see, you know, how much or how well does some of these ideas about student success culture, how much is that already a part of the work that you're doing? And can anybody give me an example of how you're already thinking about that in your work? Anybody have an example? All right. All right, Suzanne, I might need to rely on one of the questions you might have.
Here we go. I have a question, but Erin Schumack from Penn State Altoona beat me to it in terms of intentionally celebrating and supporting first gen students at Penn State Altoona. Erin, if you're willing to elaborate more, we'd love to hear some of the ways that you're doing that.
Hi, everybody. So we started a chapter of the Tri Alpha Honor Society at Penn State Altoona this past spring. And I'm sorry, I'm still panning through all of the participants to see if you can see me.
Yes.
And we also are starting a first gen, we officially have started it. We're just still lifting it off, but called I'm First. So because the criteria for joining Tri Alpha Honor Society is pretty high as far as the GPA, it's a 3.2. So we wanted to make sure that we still were welcoming and supporting all of our first gen students on campus. So the I'm First initiative will be open to all of our first gen students. And so that's been a partnership through our Student Success Center and our DEIB Belonging Center on campus. So still pretty new, but
Nice. Yeah, so let me, Erin, if you wouldn't mind staying on to entertain one question for me. So did you say it was a 3.2 criteria?
yeah, 30 credits, 3.2.
Okay. So
it's a National Honor Society.
Yeah, so it is really an honor. Yeah, it's an honor
Yes.
commitment. Yeah, yeah, but specifically oriented to first gen students.
Yes, and actually it's the membership is open to faculty, staff, and alumni, and there's also like an honorary membership. So we haven't dove into too much of that yet. We just inducted faculty, staff, and students because we only had one ceremony so far. So we're going to have another induction ceremony in the fall. We might explore some of those other membership options, but we had, if I remember correctly off the top of my head, it was 43. We have around 2,200 students on campus and about 37% are first gen. So like, it was just really encouraging numbers.
That's great. Yeah. And I will say this, just as a way to kind of connect some of what I just shared to yours, not as anything that would critique what you're doing at all. But the idea of really making sure that the people who are working in this first gen success initiative really come at it with a student asset-based, an asset-based frame, and to think about how we sometimes depress expectations for first gen students and what that means, or think that somehow it's less than continuing gen students, and even just using the continuing gen versus first gen as opposed to the phrase that I am trying to eliminate from as many places as I can, non-first gen, that really adopting a continuing gen and first gen language is a really important mindset shift, I think, that needs to happen. And I would just, encourage you and colleagues to think about how do we make sure that we are always proceeding with an asset-based frame when we are creating particularly specialized programs that could carry some old stigma, and to really make sure that you're exploring those kind of beliefs.
I appreciate those comments, Jillian. And absolutely, myself and my colleague Sue Patterson, we're the advisors for Tri Alpha. We've done some talks, some presentations, and that's one of the things that we always kind of highlight, is that we aren't looking at this from like a deficit or
Yeah.
patronizing. And
Yeah.
Sue and I are both first gen college grads. So like, yeah, so that's definitely like important to us. And a concept I stumbled upon early on was like this idea of funds of knowledge, and just like
Yep.
really identifying what people
Excellent.
are bringing to the table as strengths, not
Excellent.
limitation.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's the kind of literature and evidence-based practice of working from a funds of knowledge approach that I think you want to bring into that initiative right away. Oh, I'm happy to hear that. Okay,
Mhm.
proceed, Erin. Yeah.
Yeah.
And team, yeah.
And that's an excellent point to end on, and thinking about the funds of knowledge our students bring to our institutions. I just want to thank Jillian so much again for being here and just being and showing up repeatedly every year at our institutes. It's so wonderful to have your expertise and time. And so we're really grateful. And just as a reminder, Jillian is offering to do an office hour tomorrow at 11:15 a.m. Eastern time,
Mhm.
where we can ask more questions about student success, student engagement, as well as high impact practices, which is just another hat that you wear. It's all a part of the same wealth of knowledge that you have and provide us. So thank you so much again. And thank you to
Thank you.
everyone